All right, so here, upcoming next, we will move on to the next interesting topic. So the next section, our speaker are going to talk about the Cyfluence, the convergence of cyber attacks and hostile influence. So any of our visitors or exhibitors would like to come and join us here, it is a great opportunity for you. We have many of available seats right at the tech stage, and this session will begin right now. And join me in welcoming the director of Cyfluence Research Center, Mr. Florian Frank, up on the stage.
Hello. Wow, big crowd today. Thank you, Ori. Thank you very much. Today we're going to talk about the convergence of hostile influence in cybersecurity. But before that, a few words to ourselves. I'm the director of the Cyfluence Research Center, and we are an organization that is focused on studying digital hostile influence. We're based in Berlin. If you haven't been there, it's a wonderful city. Just don't go in winter. It's very dark, very dreary, but springtime, summer, amazing. Great beer as well. One of the guiding principles of the CRC is we try to bridge the gap between the academic field and what I like to call the practical side of things, the people in the trenches. And I think this is something really important that we miss out a lot. Both sides have a lot to offer. Academia, there's very few sectors where you actually have that many smart people and the ability to take a lot of resources and put it together. The downside in academia is sometimes that it's very theoretical, and they get lost often in kind of thoughts that once you try to put them into reality, they just don't work. On the other side, though, we have the people on the practical side, and I would count myself to that. We work in the trenches, we fight in the trenches, we really understand what's going on, but we're often so focused on the here and now that we lose kind of the perspective of what's going on a bigger picture. And to really try to create some form of sustainable change, we need both sides. We need the knowledge of the practical side, but we need the academics to be able to create the frameworks that we can then implement across the globe. Check out our homepage. We have a lot of reports, articles, etc. Everything's for free. It can be downloaded, PDFs. We constantly have new things coming in. We just have, our latest article was from Osnat Mokrin, an amazing researcher out of the University of Haifa on emotions and hostile influence. And actually one of the takeaways was that fact-checking doesn't work quite as well as many people say, especially the fact-checkers. And we actually published it a few days before Mark Zuckerberg said that he's canceling all the fact-checkers, so ahead of our time. I need to nerd out a little bit and talk about terminology. Gerald, my man. It's important, and why do we care? Terminology defines the project and can have serious consequences down the line. And I'll give you an example of that. A dear friend of mine is working on a project with the ministry at the moment, and they were able to uncover a large network of inauthentic accounts, which was pushing out a very negative narrative against the country. The problem was that the messaging they were using was not based on disinformation. Instead, they used real cases, so real things, but they were flooding the information sphere and crowding out all other stories around it. So it sounded like this country was absolutely terrible. He ran to the ministry, said, I found something, it's wonderful, it's great, and they said no. we don't care, because a few years back they actually defined what they're after as disinformation and not hostile influence, which is absolutely insane when you think about it. And that's why one of the things I always find very important is that we look at what we're actually after, and that's why I find hostile influence the much better topic. Just a quick explanation. Hostile efforts, external, internal actors, it's about manipulation. Damaging political processes, also companies, reputations, etc., etc. Now, this messy thing here is something that we really adhere to, and I know I used to work in the cybersecurity field and took this with me. We always try to look from the perspective of the attacker, which is something that in this field, astonishingly, most people don't do. When you look at an attacker, he gets a budget, he gets a mission, and he needs to run and do something. And what he does, and this is what we call hostile influence campaign building blocks, depending on the budget and his target, etc., he starts putting together different aspects of his infrastructure. But he also has to think of a strategy. And this is where we, for example, consider disinformation one aspect in a strategy. But it's only one. It can be, like I said before, you can say real events and just hyperinflate them, etc., etc. Many different examples. This is also really important for defense teams to consider. Hostile influence campaigns, they don't just happen out of nowhere. Like I said, there's an attacker. There's, in this case, I call it a threat actor. There's planning, there's resources, there's coordination, meaning time, content, narratives, malicious intention. I don't care about a campaign against smoking. Good for you. We're talking about hostile campaigns. And inauthenticity, in a sense what we call fake users. But not only. Really sophisticated campaigns actually use real influencers, mix it up with inauthentic users, etc., etc. So it's a very complicated thing. Narrative attacks, this is something you'll probably be seeing here. There's a few companies here that also use this term. It's interchangeable with hostile influence. I prefer hostile influence because when you have really sophisticated attackers, especially nation-state attackers, they will run actually multiple narratives, not just one. So I find narrative attack is just a little bit, too small. But, if you see it here, it's the same thing. Now, we're at a cybersecurity convention, so I did want to bring a little bit one niche topic in hostile influence, which is how it pertains to cybersecurity. Now, I started in cybersecurity. I moved to the intelligence field because I think it's much cooler. And now this year, I had to hire actually someone from cybersecurity because now we see that in the realm of hostile influence, cybersecurity is playing a much larger role. We see cyber attacks for influence. And there's something we need to consider, and I see this happening all the time. People forget that we're actually in a continuous flow, and especially in cybersecurity. We have a threat landscape which is continuously changing. We have attacker behavior which is continuously changing, and based on that we have new defensive measures. But based on the defensive measures, the attackers come up with new ideas, etc., etc. And again, like I mentioned before, many of us from the practical side, we're so entrenched in the here and now, we sometimes forget to take a step back and look actually at the bigger picture and how things are developing. We take the 1960s and 70s, ARPANET, the grandfather of the internet. Most of the security around there was literally physical security, fences, etc. There was only very few devices there. We had the first passwords coming in. We moved to the 1980s. We still have limited connectivity. Most systems are standalone, localized networks, still basic perimeter security. We do have the first antivirus software. I think McAfee was founded in 1987. In this phase, we also have the first major attack. I don't know if you guys, anyone here hear of the Morris attack? Morris worm? Absolutely legendary. If you haven't Googled it, it's such a great story. Infected 10% of all devices in the world. Amazing. And based out of that, we have the first cyber legislation. Move to the 90s, and this is where it becomes really tricky. The World Wide Web happens, connectivity explosion. One of my topics that I really like is the rise of the much feared script kiddie. All of a sudden, families buy computers, let their kids loose on them. They happily start playing around and create viruses, which were in the 90s rampant everywhere. But we also see an evolution in the security side. Network security became a thing, intrusion detection systems, etc. But on the attacker side, we see automation starting. And this is something where we begin to see that, step by step, it's getting serious. Hit the 2000s, and the complexity of attacks explodes. It's really, we begin to see a real professionalization, crime syndicates coming into the cyber realm, APTs, coordinated attacks, etc., etc. Interestingly, on the defense side, I would argue one of the big things is people begin to see that it's not just about technology. We need to bring in people, processes. We have new frameworks coming out which emphasize governance, risk management, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a huge step in the cybersecurity realm, away from, let's say, just the firewall and the antivirus. Now, forgive me, 2010s and 20s, so much is happening here. I'm only going to shorten it down to 2 points, and I think most of you are actually aware of what's going on. We have IoT, critical infrastructure, nowadays cloud coming up. But the one thing I really want to emphasize is the kill chain, which was developed by a bunch of researchers from Lockheed Martin. And I think it's a very nice example of how very practically minded people and academics work together. The kill chain was something that I think is really a game changer because it took the cyber attack and gave it context and put it into a timeline. Meaning it's not just the attack itself, it begins somewhere. Someone thinks of the attack. There's a certain chain of events that lead to the attack and things that happen after the attack. And because we can map it out now, we can come up with strategies of actually countering it. I'm talking about threat intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I want to mention this is there's a very interesting thing that's just coming out now. It's the influence kill chain. The influence kill chain, we look at influence attacks. I won't get into it today, but there's a workshop tomorrow with Intercept, and this gentleman right here that developed the influence kill chain, and dare I say we had a little part in it as well. And it's really interesting because I think for the first time we actually have something in the hands that makes sense and gives context to influence attacks, which, dare I say, we have never had before. What's been missing in all of this has been the rise and subsequent weaponization of social media. And this is, we look at Facebook, founded 2004, not that relevant yet. And out of that, of course, came OSINT as a countermeasure. I mean, OSINT is as old as any other intelligence area, but it was always kind of the frowned upon one. The human guys are the really cool guys with the spies, and the SIGINT guys, the hackers, etc. And the OSINT guys were in the archives. But now we have currently something more than 5 billion users. Every single person, not every, but every organization, criminals, everything is running on social media, ClearNet, etc. So now OSINT is actually one of the very, very interesting aspects. And I'll get to in a moment why that's relevant. But with 5 billion users and all of this, let's say, interconnectivity, all of a sudden we have the emergence of hostile influence campaigns. And I think every single country in the world and every single society in the world is currently fighting with it. I'm from Germany. We have elections in 2 months, and our social media is rampant with campaigns originating in Russia, et cetera, et cetera. The same thing, we look at Romania, where an election was actually canceled based on hostile influence from abroad. Very controversial, by the way, but it just shows the seriousness of the matter. A lot of debate right now around the American election, etc. And this is, again, we saw this before. We're looking at the attackers and using different aspects of how to do it. Fake users, you know, do I decide to go on social media, messaging services, etc. But we have this little area down here I want to highlight today. And this is the use of cyber attacks in influence campaigns. When we talk about Cyfluence, i.e. cyber attacks of influence campaigns, the question is, where do they differ from normal attacks? And technically they actually don't. It's the intent that's different. It's not about stealing money, it's not about information, it's about gaining influence. For example, eroding trust, damaging reputation, governments, societies, but also companies. We are now seeing a shift more and more into mercenaries being hired by companies and interest groups to damage other companies. Maybe a little discourse on this one. Similar to what we saw on state-sponsored hacking groups, we see this on state-sponsored influence attackers, where governments used to actually run them on their own. And we know governments, they're very slow, they're not very adept at things, so they began outsourcing it to private sector companies. A big one right now, we had the revelations around the SDA and the Doppelganger campaign. It's a private company in Russia hired by the Russian government to run these kind of campaigns. But these companies now have the knowledge of how to run the campaigns, and they're profit-oriented. And now you have other companies actually hiring them. So this is a huge issue we're seeing that is emerging right now. And what we classically see is we look at this field in two dimensions. We have the cyber field and we have the influence field. And they don't correlate, they don't work together. But when we look at sophisticated attackers today, they look at both sides, and they work together and they interlink them. And the defense is not there yet. Not yet. We see it changing now. So just a quick overview of what I wanted to give a categorization of the kind of cyber attacks for influence. We talk about on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality, we had just one case now, cyber attack on the Republicans. A lot of internal papers about J.D. Vance, the vice president, were leaked. No one cared about the attack itself. It was about damaging his reputation, seeing if you can manipulate the elections through that. This was an example of DDoS attacks on different governmental sites in the US. You know, there's a lot of debate on, you know, stop the steal, et cetera, and this was really aimed at damaging the reputation of the electoral process. And what's really important, the cyber attacks had no impact on the electoral infrastructure, none whatsoever, or on the electoral process. It's only about gaining influence in this realm. This is one of my favorite examples, actually. It was a hack on the EMA. It's an organization that works on looking at, they were testing the COVID vaccine. And don't nail me on the numbers. They said it was something like 81% effective. The hackers, they stole the data, switched the number to 18. And then leaked it. And then all of a sudden we saw in Telegram groups and everywhere saying the COVID vaccine doesn't work. At a huge effect across the world. So we see again how the cyber attack was actually one element within an entire influence attack. So why should I care? Let the PR deal with it, right? Well, little secret, PR guys are full of shit. Pardon the language. I love working with them. I love drinking with them. They're great guys. But this problem here is as much a technological problem as it is a communications problem. And the PR guys are not good at technology. And to give you an example, when we, for example, analyze campaigns and we hunt campaigns, there's different ways of doing, but a very simplified way of saying it is the first step is we need to collect data. We need to understand what's going on. How are we being attacked? From where are we being attacked? And that's data collection. And we need to go to the different social media sites, X, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. We need to see what's happening. But once we have the data, we actually need to analyze the data. And I can tell you there is no single piece of software that covers everything. So even if I collect the data from, let's say, Instagram, and then I have data from Telegram, and then I have some information from the clear net, like cloned websites, or maybe the dark net, how do I actually correlate all of that? It's very, very complicated. It's doable, but you need to use lots of different kinds of software, put it together, and work with trained analysts. PR cannot do it. And then once you have all of that, you need to come up with a solution. That's where usually in the corporate sector, PR is there, or strategic communication, et cetera, et cetera. But until you get there, you need the technical side. So the question to you guys, if you're in cybersecurity, and I know this from a lot of conversations when with CISOs, and that's already the answer, who does the CEO call when they are under an influence attack? And most of the time, it's actually the CISOs. Because they're the security guys. And most of the time, they have no idea what to do because they're working with the firewalls, they're working with the threat intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. But they're not very adept at this realm. And this, dare I say, is something that's going to change in the next, that's already changing now. I'm actually talking to a lot of people in the cybersecurity field, and we see this. Wow, 4 minutes early. Thank you very much. If you have any questions on the topic, I usually lecture a week or 2 weeks on this. I had to cut it down to 25 minutes, or 21 now. I'll be most of the time at the 9500 booth or tonight at the networking event. Be happy to talk in detail about any of this. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Wow, that's a great presentation. Thank you very much. Very impressive.